Hey, thanks for joining me in my little corner of the world over to you, no matter where you're at. I'm glad you have the time to join me. I hope you stick with me through this one. This is a really special episode. I speak with Will Kimbrough. He is an amazing artist because he has worked very closely with a guy named Jimmy Buffett. They co-wrote the wonderful song on the posthumous album that is really burning up the charts throughout all the charts, Amazon Music, Spotify, all of them. And I really hope the physical sales beyond the digital ones that people have been scooping up since Mr. Buffett has departed from this great earth, but left us with lifetimes of wonderful memories forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. I hope it's all preserved. I hope everything is preserved forever and ever and ever because Jimmy Buffett is amazing. Will co-wrote the track Bubbles Up, which, as we discuss in this, got all kinds of attention all the way up to Sir Paul McCartney. So we kind of go into that a bit. But anyway, Will has a great new release out, his eighth solo album. I believe it's his eighth. It's called For the Life of Me. And it's just a wonderful package. We talk about how this all came together, recorded up there in Nashville. He's a pretty deep guy, and you're going to hear some really deep philosophy as to how it all comes together in his approach to songwriting as well. So please join me for this. This is July 22nd. This is in advance of his Eddie's Attic show right here in the greater Atlanta area. It's actually Decatur. So if you're in the metropolitan Atlanta area, Decatur is east of Atlanta and this great little place called Eddie's Attic, which has been getting a lot of mention here on my podcast. I did a lot of stories over there covering some musicians who have performed over there as well. So I really hope you enjoy this. July 22nd. So he's, I believe, performing on July 25th. So I hope I can go see him. If you're hearing this on July 22nd, the week of July 22nd, please do yourself a favor and see Will Kimbrough. And guy has just had amazing connections and just an incredible songwriter. So yeah, a wonderful day, July 22nd, though. I was thinking, what kind of unusual things do they call July 22nd? It's Mango Day. It's also National Hammock Day. So unbelievable. And Casual Pie Day. I don't understand what that's all about. So enjoy. I'll see you on the other side of this. Where are you at this morning?
I'm at home, Nashville.
Nashville. Good. Good for you.
Yeah, yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, very nice up there. We're getting a little warmer here down here in Atlanta. It's
Oh, yeah. It's getting warmer here for sure.
yeah, all over. We need the water. That's
Yeah, yeah. You guys have a water thing going on.
yeah, I mean once we get into like maybe a week or two, it gets a little nerve-wracking. We might be heading into another drought season, which
Right.
we had several years ago. It was
Yeah,
pretty bad.
yeah,
Almost over a
yeah.
hundred almost every single day. But
Yeah, same here.
yeah, thanks for joining me. And
Yeah, my pleasure.
absolutely, it's just really exciting. I listened to the new release and awesome as always. This
Thank
is
you.
your what eighth solo album?
At least I think it's more like the 10th or 11th or something. So,
Yeah, you throw those what live releases, all that fun stuff in there too, and compilations and
okay.
whatnot. That's yeah, whatever. Yeah, it's funny
Well,
because you lose count after a while. It's like I don't, once the catalog starts expanding.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's lots of bands and things like that. So
Yeah, a number of
lots,
bands. That's yeah.
yeah, lots
Yeah,
of. But I've been doing this a long time. So,
yeah, it's coming up on close to 4 decades now. So that's
yeah.
it's a
Well, let's see. The first Bushman release was in '85. Yeah. So, yeah. 39 years.
been keeping busy. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, great new release for The
Thank
Life
you.
of May. Yeah. Just a lot of good inspirational stuff on there. How did this all come about? Was this a couple of years in the making?
Yeah, I'd say. definitely. I made a record in 2019, and then I made a record in 2020, and then really started a record in 2021, and that's this record. But what happened is I started back pretty much full time working right in the middle of 2020, because I do this post traumatic growth songwriting work with first responders and combat veterans,
Oh, cool.
and so in June 2020 I started getting on the plane. So really, I mean, only 3 months after the world shut down, I was back at the airport every couple of weeks, going to a writing trip. So,
Yeah.
so when 2021 came around, I was already working full time, and all my other full time work came back. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and all of a sudden things started
So all of a
rushing
sudden,
back. Yeah.
I had um, my solo work, that work, Emmylou Harris dates, production work, session work, and so it's just been ever since then. It's just been crazy, like 200 days a year on the road.
Wow.
And then also making my records, making other people's records, writing, all that stuff. So it's been great, but it's an intense, it's an intense schedule for sure. Like it doesn't really slow down unless I just mark out the calendar, which is cool. I guess it's called having a career.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And where you do very well is on the road, is where you're getting that response. You got to get out there, and you've got a really
Yeah.
nice, looks like a good tour there. You're coming up on now Asheville, yeah, and
Hmm.
we'll be here in Atlanta for an album release party over at my one of my favorite venues, Eddie's Attic.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great
Yeah.
room.
Yeah, it's a great room. Totally.
Very
Has been
good.
forever. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, good vibe. Very, very good
Yeah.
vibe. Yeah. So
And
you,
then we
you
now we have Coral Reefer Band gigs. So
oh wow.
um so that's we just did Jazz Fest because I've been wrote with Buffett for 20 years, played on 7 records, and
Yeah.
so we just did Jazz Fest, and then the phone started ringing from I guess Live Nation about doing more shows. So we got 3 shows on the books. One is in Atlanta at Chastain Park. So
Oh, cool.
yeah, I think that's August 2nd. So we're doing the amphitheater at Gulf Shores, Orange Beach, and then Chastain in Atlanta, and then Riverbend in Cincinnati. And then we'll see what happens in the future. No one knows.
Yeah, Live Nation gets really excited about like nostalgia, and it does very well, especially here in the
Yeah.
Southeast, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. Yeah. How did the whole relationship with Buffett start?
Let's see. Really through Todd Snyder. I
Yeah.
was out on the road with Todd Snyder. We were on the Margaritaville label, which was distributed by MCA, and
Hmm.
um, and so Buffett would we went and opened for Buffett. He'd come out to shows. He'd come to the studio and listen to mixes. All the stuff that the president of a label should be doing. He was doing, and um, and then one night we were in New Orleans playing at Tipitina's, and the backstage at Tipitina's is really small, especially back then. I don't know exactly what it looks like now. This is in the mid '90s, and just a trashy old club backstage. And it was packed though because Buffett was back there and Jerry Jeff Walker, and so
Oh yeah.
everybody in the audience tried to get backstage like it was going to be the party of the century, and it was just a big crowded broom closet really, and so I was up against the wall trying to look for signs of a tour manager taking us out of there back to the hotel, and next to me was Buffett. So I introduced myself, and he had just seen me. We had just been on stage together, and so oh, there we are. And he said, I said, well, we're from the same hometown, and he said, oh, you're another escapee, and
Yeah.
I said, yeah, and so then we just became friends, and we started writing together a few years later, and it just went on until a few months before he passed away.
He worked all the way to the end. So inspirational. I know
Yeah,
people just loved him here in Atlanta every time he'd come to the Omni next door where I worked or
right.
down over at Lakewood. It was just always a party. Everybody just
Yeah,
loved it. And he
yeah,
left the world that way too. And I love that single Bubbles Up. That's just it
yeah,
really stood out to me too out of that whole release I was listening to. It's
yeah.
really gosh.
We knew it was special, and we had to write the last 10 songs we wrote together. We had to do it over the phone because he was. I mean, we made two albums while he had cancer. The album before that came out in 2020. That a lot of releases that came out in 2020 are just kind of lost records because there wasn't really a tour. And I understand too that Jimmy, was a had such a catalog that he could just play old songs and the audience would be quite happy. And you know what I mean? Like when you
Oh
go see
yeah.
Paul McCartney, he plays
Hmm.
like 30, 35 songs and then he goes, here's one off the new album and everybody goes to get a beer.
I
And
know. I've
so,
I've seen it happen at least
I mean,
four
it's
times.
it's part of being on that level. Like,
Yeah.
that's one of the, if you're gonna uh, if you're gonna say the glass is half full, then an artist like me, I've got all the artistic freedom because my audience actually wants to hear a new song, and there aren't like a 15 greatest number one hits that everybody demands hearing. So they do want to hear certain songs, but I can play new songs too, and people aren't going to go take a pee.
I know. I could totally feel it every time, even with
Yeah,
all the legacy artists. But it's
right.
like I paid a fortune to see this guy. I'm like, I want to hear the new stuff. I can't believe how people zone out. I just saw the Stones here
Yeah.
in Atlanta on last Friday, and it's just like, well, people are texting during it, and it's like Keith gets up to three songs. People are going off to get beers. I'm like, I paid to see all of you, not just Mick
Yeah.
running around here.
Yeah. Well, to each his own, right? And
Yeah,
but writing that song was real. So we wrote. I mean, back to the actual writing part.
yeah.
We wrote quite a few songs just over the phone because he was going. He was he had treatment for Merkel cell carcinoma for
Mm.
almost 4 years, I think. So that's a long time to do chemo. And so he was a hardy person. He was a physical. He was tough and he wanted to stay alive. And he was
Yeah.
enjoying the hell out of his life. Anyway, but writing with him via technology was actually wonderful. He wasn't like, oh God, we got to write over the phone. He was like, this is the way we're going to do it because I got to go to Boston and get a treatment. So run with this idea this morning and send it to me, and then I'll work on it from here. And that's what we did, back and forth, and we wrote 10 songs that way, really. Um, and five of them were on the previous record. Five of them were on this Equal Strand on All Parts record. And Bubbles Up was really the first one that we did. He sent me some notes. He would take a picture of like a piece of paper and it would just have some notes on it, maybe a few scraps of lyrics, but ideas and just the concept. And I would just run with it and just do whatever I thought would be cool. I didn't try to be him. Um, and and then he would take it and play with it and send it back to me. We'd send each other these little phone recordings. It was great. I mean, I know people that wouldn't dare write that way. They have to be in the room together, but that's not the way my life nor his life, quite frankly. I mean, he was a jet setter, and I'm a person who's on the road 200 days a year.
Yeah, that's
And
great. The technology is fantastic to be able to do that.
yeah, if you're willing, you got to trust somebody. You have to trust your
Yeah.
co-writer. And I know people that are dear friends of mine that wouldn't trust me to just run with the idea, and it offends them a little bit. And I don't mean that in any negative way. I just mean it's an observation of fact. And whereas Buffett was like, "Hey, we were," because when he decided to make a record, it was the middle of December. We made the record in the middle of January, so it was
Mm.
literally we need to write this record not only over the holidays. We're talking like from about December 11th to
Yeah.
about January 25th. And but it wasn't a problem because he got in touch with me. He got in touch with Mac McAnally. He got in touch with Peter Mayer, some other folks, and then next thing you know, we recorded 14 songs, and it was a blast, and yeah, Bubbles Up was special. Everybody knew it. Everybody felt it. Everybody was sort of handling it with care, and trying to also not overproduce it and just play a live take of it and then add some harmonies and see
Mm.
where we stood. And that's pretty much what the record is. And so we listened to my little home demo, and then we just wrote down the chords and we performed it like twice, and there it was. Great.
Totally. Yeah, it really sums up the character, his whole life, everything about it. It's just
Yeah.
like, thank God the world gave us Jimmy Buffett. It's and with
Yeah.
us forever, forever and ever and ever.
Yeah.
That's the greatest thing to be
Yeah.
part of that. That's yeah.
Yeah.
And if you've
Wonderful.
done that, you've done your job. If you can
Yeah.
get us to go to a show for 2.5 hours or whatever, and we could just put life on hold for a while and feel good about ourselves, it's
Yeah.
magic.
Yeah. Yeah. Storytelling and through songs, and also through just singing, telling the story about the song, and people want to connect that way. Not everybody, not every show's like that, but that was that kind of show, and he was certainly one of the greats. And I think, partly because he took such a joyous and lighthearted view of the world, not exclusively, however. I mean, look at the song Bubbles Up. It's not heavy hearted, but it's not lighthearted either. It's about
Right.
somebody who's lost their way and who's sinking in the water, basically, and metaphorically, who's drowning, in their struggle. And but songs like He Went to Paris and The Death of an Unpopular Poet, those are just beautiful songs from his, he really idolized young Gordon Lightfoot.
Yeah.
And so that kind of folk singer, you know, uh, troubadour was in him, And I remember when I first heard Buffett, it was alongside people like John Prine and Jerry Jeff,
Yeah.
and that and Guy Clark. Although Guy was lesser known, but Guy Clark, Rodney Crowell, that crew of folks, whether they all knew each other at the time or not. I was a kid, like a 10-year-old kid, and I was hearing that music, and it definitely, and even early Tom Waits, Looking for the Heart of Saturday
Love
Night,
that. Yeah.
that could be a Jerry Jeff. Well, Jerry Jeff covered it, but I mean, it's in that style.
Right.
And so everybody was kind of, picking up a guitar, and Jackson Brown, I mean, all that stuff. It all, to me, all ties in together. And then you go down the rabbit hole, and you become a huge fan of Warren Zevon. You become a huge fan of Randy Newman. You become a huge fan of Ry Cooder. You become a huge, it just goes,
Oh yeah.
and on and on and on. And then you figure out that, and then you get to Leonard Cohen, and then that leads you to Roberta Flack, and that leads you back to of course the source, Bob Dylan and Hank Williams and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And of course, anyway, so working with Buffett was great. He was a great songwriter, and an open-minded, open-hearted artist who, there's a lot of world music in there, and musical references that he wanted to make sure he got in there. Bubbles Up musically refers to Duane Allman on the slide. The tempo of the song in 6/8 time refers to like waltz time, which kind of refers back to one of his early albums, Living and Dying in 3/4 time. So there's a lot of little messages in there
Mm.
that I really liked, and like when this world is reeling from that pressure drop feeling, and of course Pressure Drop being one of the greatest reggae songs ever by Toots and the Maytals, and also covered by the Clash in my mind, because that's where I
Wow.
heard it first. Because I'm
Huh.
that age. I'm 60, so I grew up
Yeah.
listening to the Clash cover reggae songs, and
Oh
that's how
yeah.
I got into reggae. So
Back
Buffett
in your
got into
time.
it through Bob Marley. And so anyway, it's cool. It's really cool, and open-minded person. And I'll miss that guy, as a co-writer, because the joy of uh of playing with language and having fun with words, and then throwing in a little reference to some kind of African guitar style, that I never got to do that with other songwriters. Like in Nashville, they're not necessarily wanting to hear that. Although there are people who know all about it here. There's any kind of music you want here in Nashville, but
Mm.
if you're co-writing, most of the time people are just trying to write like, something with great verses and a killer chorus, and you know And sometimes you just happen to write a great song that way that's for the ages rather than just for a marketplace, but
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah, Nashville is a great town for
yeah,
music and people just inspiring one another. Great community.
yeah,
So supportive,
yeah.
it seems like.
It is. It has an energy that I don't know of anywhere else. There's the hyper growth side to it. I mean, I know you live in Atlanta, so we're sort of following the Atlanta model, like just build it
Wow.
all up and see what happens. And my oldest daughter lives in Atlanta and she loves it. I mean, and that's actually a better place to live for a young renter
Yeah.
than Nashville. Nashville's extremely um uh it's a terrible place to be a young renter. Whereas when I moved here, it was a wonderful place for a young renter.
Yeah.
Um, and I was able to move here with my band and live on nothing and do music, and pay my bills. But it's not like that anymore. You can live in a hovel for $1,600 a month in a terrible neighborhood with one
Yeah.
bedroom. So I mean that's not, I know if you live in LA or Boston or whatever, you're like, well, whatever,
Yeah.
but you're
Yeah.
also you're not a subway ride away from the Museum of Modern Art. You got to get in your car and drive 30 minutes to get back into town. So it's a different thing. It's not the end of the world, although it could be.
Yeah, yeah, very well. Yeah.
We never
Yeah.
know these
Yeah.
days.
When you're
So
really, really young though, you could have like, 10 roommates or whatever, you don't care. It's like you're paying your dues
that's
at
what
that
I had.
point.
I
But
mean,
yeah.
our rent was 500 a month, but we split it about 8 ways, and so we were all on the road anyway. We had my band and half of Delbert McClinton's band living in a house. We had a rehearsal basement where we could all go down there and practice, and we were never there anyway unless we were there practicing. So it was awesome.
Yeah, talk about paying the dues. Like, so many people now want that instant fame. Oh, I'll go on The Voice and that'll catapult me into, in front of the world. But like, no, to really, really make it and to really get that organic feel and become a good singer-songwriter, you got to live. You got to have something to write about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and there are people who got famous early I mean, look at Prince. His first hit was when he was 18. When he put his first record out, I Want to Be Your
Yeah.
Lover, was a big hit, and he was 18, but he was one in a
Yeah.
billion kind of person. Um, yeah, and I know it's interesting too, though. You don't really get to you make choices along the way, but you don't make like one grand choice and that's your path.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you read about an artist that you are interested in, it seems that way, but of course the devil is in the details, but also the living is in the details and the experiences. And so I
Yeah.
was just talking to this. There's a Daryl Sanders does a Substack, and it's all related to Todd Snyder. It's kind of like an ever evolving biography of Todd
Mm.
Snyder. And he interviewed me recently because I had a tour diary of the only time I went to Europe with Todd, and so I was able to. He would ask me a question, I would look it up in my diary, and so my answers were pretty spot on because it was like tonight we played in Copenhagen at this place, and this is what I thought of the show. The next day we went to the airport and went to Oslo or whatever. So that was fun to
Yeah.
remember. It made me really kick myself for not keeping a physical diary all these years.
Yeah.
I
It
just did
takes
it.
some
I did it for a
discipline.
while.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of, and in that band, I was just literally the guitar player. And so whenever we traveled, I was just following whoever telling me where to go. So I would sit there and write in my journal, and it was great to have it. So yeah,
Yeah. And you still do it kind of old school notebooks, not really having to type this into your iPhone or Droid.
yeah. Although we have all that, and that's pretty cool. But just good luck trying to find it and put it all in one place. I mean, you can do it, but in fact, I had a friend recently. I do a Patreon thing, and where people subscribe to your creative content, and I started it in 2020, like so many people, but I've kept it going.
Cool.
And I had a patron at the time who was experiencing some pretty intense, mental, um, I don't even know what to call it, mental health situation. And and then he stopped being a patron. He deleted his account, but he had sent me these long messages on
Mm.
the, and so they're in my Patreon. And his brother, this guy's brother, reached out to me recently and said, "My brother told me he wrote a novel on your Patreon."
Oh my
And I was
gosh.
like, "Do you mean he wrote a novel about my Patreon?" And he said, "No, like he sent you." And I guess what he meant was he wrote you these long messages, but nobody said that. They said he wrote a novel. So I looked it up and I was able to copy and paste. And I just sent the guy this long email. I was like, okay, here it is. You're going to have to copy this into a document and look at it.
Hmm.
And it really was about, I mean, it was thousands and thousands of words.
Oh my gosh. So yeah, kind of
But it was
rambling there.
fascinating. But well, it
Yeah.
was memory about that included me. He was having these memories
Hmm.
of like going to see our band back in the early '80s, and so it was kind of fascinating to me. And then some of it would drift off into what may or may not have been just sort of
Yeah.
uh, delusional or whatever, fantastic kind of stuff. But anyway, they're mainly referring to living a life. One of the things that
Sure.
you can do if you're on the road all the time, when you first start doing it, like if you're partying or whatever, if you're having drinks after the show, those are experiences, but you're probably not writing them down. And you're probably having a similar conversation from night to night in bars with people. But if you start paying attention to whatever's happening, and even if you're just driving in a car or in a van or a bus or at the airport, you can check in with the world. And one of the ways is just to read good writing, and
Yeah.
listen to great music. And then whatever you're thinking about, write it down. Um, when I do that post-traumatic growth work, I mean, I've written, I don't know how many songs I've written. It's probably a couple of hundred songs I've written with all those folks, with Songwriting with Soldiers and with the Warrior Path post-traumatic growth program. And all I have to do is listen, get someone talking about what they're going through and listen, because there's not much more beautiful language than someone telling their truth about their struggle. And there's humor,
Sure.
there's pure humor, there's dark humor, there's uh, confessional prose, and there's also seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, or seeing the light in general. Like, this is how I saw the light. This is how I decided I wanted to live instead of kill myself, etc. I mean, that's literally what it's about.
Hmm.
And so it's very inspiring. It can be heavy, but for the most part, you're with people. I'd say 99.999% of the time, you're with someone or a group of people who are simply trying to get better and working really hard at it and have a better life. And so, what's more inspiring than that? And
Totally.
so, I love that. And so I constantly am with people I'm only going to be with, in all likelihood, that one evening for a couple of hours, and the next morning for an hour while we go back over what we wrote. And then I move on. But it stays the experience that I'm having. It might not, it's not me like living in Prague or digging ditches in, New Mexico, or, some kind of like
Sure.
Jack Kerouac on the road kind of idea. But nevertheless, you meet people and have a real conversation with them, and you listen to them and write down what they say and make a song out of those words. It's quite an experience. And so here at 60 years old, um, I'm getting a new experience related directly to songwriting. And it's just, I can't, I mean, you can probably hear how crazy I am about this work, because it's a new thing. It's a
Yeah.
new thing for me. It's a new thing for human beings. It's post-traumatic growth. So I love it. I mean, and it's certainly affected my writing. Bubbles Up was directly affected by that writing. When Jimmy sent me that idea, it hit me that, wow, I wonder who he's thinking about. you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
And then
You c-
also, I wonder if he's thinking about himself a little bit. And I didn't really think he was, but I had to go in my imagination, go, what if he was? What
mm,
would I say to him if he confided in me? Or is this song idea him confiding in someone that he feels safe doing it? Like I wasn't one of his closest people that was with him all the time. I'm somebody he reached out to write with, and often from a remote distance. So obviously he felt safe with me to write for him a very serious song, somebody who had written so many lighthearted and funny songs, like, ain't this world a funny place kind of a point of view. And then this one was more like, hey, people need you to listen to them and show them which way they need to go back to where the oxygen is and the air and the light and to
hmm
where they can live better.
Yeah.
And so, anyway,
Yeah, what an
um,
impact. It's such an impact. And, even impress Paul McCartney. It's like, you've hit the pinnacle at that point.
yeah, right.
Completely.
I bought a new hat.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's amazing. That was like a pretty unreal, surreal, I guess, thing. And yeah, so and then it was interesting that I had planned, to put out my solo record, and I understand too that I'm not front page news like Buffett was. I'm not that on that level of
Sure.
fame, and but I just decided to go ahead and keep my release date because um, well, why wait? It had taken long enough. You asked me earlier, and I kind of just
Yeah.
started rambling, but
Yeah.
about if it took a few years to put it together. The thing about making records for me now, making albums, and I am an album person. I know
Yeah.
I talk to young people all the time, and they're talking about, we're all about releasing singles and then seeing if there's a value in putting out an album. I'm just an album person. It's kind of like asking a novelist to only write short stories and only release one at a time. At some point, you have a longer form, although admittedly, an album isn't a novel. An album is more like a collection of short stories. But that the idea of those collections, I mean, I grew up with albums and I grew up with
Yeah.
also books, particularly collections of short stories by people like Raymond Carver and Flannery O'Connor and Eudora Welty. They were all on my mother's bookshelves, and so I grew up with that too. So this idea of the collection of ideas, um, I don't really want to go away from it. I don't want to spend a year on one song and then
Yeah.
put it
Yeah.
out there because, and also my audience is album people too. I'm not, I'm not that big on streaming. I'm more interested. People are more interested in coming to hear a new song and hear me tell a story about it. And so, for a songwriter, that's a great place to be. Um, for a popular one would be popular artist, it's not as good as you'd like it to be. But at the same time, the variety of things that I get to do is pretty astounding. I mean, I literally uh, went from uh, a series Emmylou Harris tour dates to my record release show to Jazz Fest with the Coral Reefer Band
Mm.
to playing Preservation Hall with the Preservation Hall Band, playing one of the songs that Jimmy and I wrote, and they played on the album to close the whole Jazz Fest at midnight on Sunday at Preservation Hall. And then I got up the next morning at the crack of dawn and drove back to Nashville with my wife. And then I got up the next day at 3 o'clock and ended up in Southwest Missouri writing with combat veterans and first responders. And now, why did I do it that way? Because, you know, Emmy Lou, my solo career, the Jimmy Buffett organization, Jazz Fest, Preservation Hall, and Songwriting with Soldiers, and Boulder Crest Foundation's post traumatic growth program, they don't revolve around me.
Yeah. Yeah. You're
I
part of it.
I work, I'm a basically, for lack of a better word, a freelance worker that works for all of them from time to time, including myself. I work for
Yeah.
myself. And so for me, that variety, and there's even more, there's a new Shamika Copeland record coming out, and this will be the
Yeah.
fourth record I produced for her, and
Huh.
also probably contains 7 or 8 songs that I co-wrote. And so I'll end up with like 25 songs I've written for Shamika Copeland. Um, so it's not about quantity either, but that's just sometimes you look back on what's happening and go, wow, that's amazing. We've produced 4 records. We've actually made 5 together. I played on one before that, and then we've written like 20 something songs. And this is just somebody that I only see every once in a while. And then we'll get together in this intense period of time and hammer out songs and hammer out a record. And then she goes her way and I go mine. And but what a lucky thing to have if you're going to write uh, some version of contemporary blues. And with her, it's all over the place. You know,
Sure.
we've worked with Jerry Douglas and Sam Bush. We've worked with Dwayne Eddy. We've worked with Jason Isbell. We've worked with uh, Cedric Burnside, Reverend Charles
What a
from
great
the
list. Yeah.
High Records. I mean, it just goes on and on. You know, it's like uh, uh,
You got a great list there.
King,
Yeah,
King
Steve Poltz and
Kingfish.
yeah.
Yeah, it just goes on and on. So yeah, Steve Poltz, Todd Snyder, Rodney Crowell, Emmy Lou, Kim Ritchie,
Yeah.
um, and
Amazing.
then Shamika and all those folks. So it really is, and I can see how a different kind of person. Like I'm almost overstimulated by being around people that I need to. It's really good therapy for me to go off by myself and do solo tours and to do this post-traumatic growth writing, because that's just me by myself. I show up somewhere and meet 8 people that I've never met before, and we write a song. 2 hours later, we finish the song using their words and their stories, and then you flit in and out of their lives and let them get back to what they're working on. And meanwhile,
Hmm.
they have this song and this recording of someone who listened to what they said at great risk to their own traumatized psyches. As part of PTSD is that telling your story is a terrifying thing, because you're you not only feel like, but you're pretty much 100% absolutely sure that whoever you tell it to is gonna hear it wrong, and it's a huge risk, and
Oh,
that's why
sure.
people get so isolated, because they don't tell anybody their story.
Oh, yeah.
And so you're literally getting this story and holding it in your hands like a little bird egg, but
Hmm.
also having to write it down and having to within 2 hours go, okay, I've taken what you said, what you said, what you said, what you said, and what you said, and I made a verse. Check it out. And I pick up the guitar and
Sure.
play it, and then I go, and then remember what you said about that sort of summed it all up. That's the title, and here's how the chorus goes. And oftentimes, what happens then is that those folks don't even recognize their own words, even if I'm singing them verbatim to what they said. And that's fascinating to me. And what it indicates is that there's a transformation that happens, that those words are transformed into something else. The person that lived the story and told the story is having it sung back to them, and it's now different to them. They hear it different, yet it's exactly what they said.
Mm.
And that's
Yes.
so fascinating to me. But
Uh,
not only fascinating, like I'm a scientist observing ants or something. It's more like it's fascinating that because I'm somebody who was always willing to sing what I was thinking or feeling, whether it was just something I thought was fun and cool to sing and was clever and fun, or whether it was pouring my heart out. But I was always getting it off my chest. I was always moving on to the next story. And as it turns out, it's a pretty healthy way to live.
yeah,
What is
totally.
the writer Joan Didion says? We tell ourselves stories in order to live.
Yeah,
And
true.
whether they're true stories or not, or whether they're just the stories we need to tell ourselves so that we can continue living. And and I love that, and I hear that every time I go work with people. I'm like, and I tell them that I say, look, we're human beings. We need to tell stories. So if you aren't telling your story, then something's wrong, and it's gonna hurt you and the people around you. And
Yeah.
so tell your story in some way. It doesn't have to be a verbal story or even a song. It can be teach somebody a recipe that your father or your mother taught you or your grandparents. It tells a story about who you are. And that's why people love songs and songwriters, and to hear the story behind the song. Again, not 100% of the people 100% of the time want that, but when you're with people who like that, it's just a valuable connection. So that's kind of why I do what I do.
Yeah, and it's nice to be on your own solo, being the boss, doing your own album, which you
Yeah.
recorded there in Nashville. Seems
Hmm.
pretty basic. You had just a few musicians and yourself, some people you've worked with for a very long time, and
Right.
feels organic and maybe what somewhat autobiographical, but you're also reflecting on the world too in this release.
Yeah, yeah, sure. There's quite a few autobiographical songs. There's some songs that are just characters created. There's a song about John Lewis. There's a song about the Clotilda, which was the boat that brought in the last Africans into slavery into the United States in 1860. And
Yeah,
that's a real personal story to me because they came to Mobile, and it was 1860. And I don't know if your listeners know this, remember this from their history, but the importation of slaves was made illegal in 1808 or around that time. But it wasn't a civil rights legislation. It was to protect the slave breeding industry in Virginia, because
yeah,
that was the biggest state,
I
that was the
don't know
richest
that.
state, and their enslaved people were having children. They were taking them away and selling them. And
Amazing.
so that legacy to me is important because you know that that stuff happened not very long ago. It seems like a long, long time ago, and it seems like, oh, everything's changed, but it's important to remember. And also, it's just an amazing story. This happened, and there's that community that was started by those people who had been born in Africa that then were sold into slavery. They came back to Mobile, Alabama, and started a community called Africa Town, and it's still there. Now it's a community that suffered the slings and arrows of being poor people in America, poor people of color particularly, but it's still there, and that spirit. And when they found the boat in like 2019 or so, the boat had been hidden in the delta near Mobile Bay and burned to hide it. It was discovered, and so the legend of Clotilda was brought to the you know National Geographic and all that, NPR. People heard about it,
Right.
books were written about it, and anyway, so I wrote that song, and Shamika Copeland recorded it, and we had Jason Isbell playing guitar. So we had two Alabama boys,
Yeah.
and Shamika doing this song about that. I felt like it was a great collaboration, but I wanted to record it myself because I'm from there, and I wanted to be able to.
Right.
Um, I could always sing that song, but if you put it on a record, you're sort of obligated to sing it sometimes. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Rather
Yeah.
than just, and also you're gonna, just from the point of view of an artist out there promoting a product, you're gonna sing it more often. So sometimes I'll put a song on there that I know is going to be a difficult, not difficult, but like it's not a happy love song, or it doesn't have a pack a punchline. Um, but it's interesting how people like, I wrote a song about the last lynching in America, which also happened in Mobile in 1981. And I'm not
Mhm.
painting that's my hometown. I'm not painting my hometown as just a bastion of racism and slavery, although it has been that. It's also a great town,
Sure.
a town with a pretty darn diverse town for the Deep South, and town with a town that's primarily Catholic and Mardi Gras and all that stuff. French, Spanish, Catholic, Mardi Gras, in mixed in with Scots Irish Baptists and stuff. And not that everybody's Christian either, but anyway. But I love my hometown, and so part of love is telling the real story.
Yeah, yeah, it could
Like if
happen
you,
anywhere though. Any of this kind of racism, discrimination, every town's got that history. So I just, the South obviously gets painted with more of it than most of the region, but like it's everywhere. I grew up in Cleveland,
yeah,
Ohio. It's
right,
it's
right.
racism's everywhere.
But I grew up with George Wallace as the governor,
Oh gosh, yeah.
and
Yeah,
when I
true.
17, Michael
Yeah.
Donald was lynched in 1981. And that didn't happen in Cleveland. Stuff happened in Cleveland,
Yeah,
but not
true.
that. And
Not on
also
that level.
because it was a port, it was a port city where cotton came
Yeah.
down the river and then out into the Gulf and over to England and places like that and up to the mills of New England. People got rich off cotton, and so
Oh yeah.
they were dependent on the slavery agriculture system, and so that's why we had a civil war.
Yeah.
So,
Oh,
so I mean, and
yeah.
I'm not paying. I'm just sort of saying
Yeah.
that
Huh.
history also says. I mean, the South is a great place. It's also a place of great cruelty and bloody history. So is everywhere, right? I mean, but that's where I'm from. So that's the story
Yeah.
that I tell. And so yeah, it's personal, and it's also sort of telling history from the point of view of like, well, this is where I'm from, and so when I walk these streets, I'm thinking about those things. I'm also thinking about where I'm going to get some shrimp, or some get a po' boy,
Right.
or where I'm going to stand and watch the Mardi Gras parade go by, or where I'm going to play music for people who love music, and there's a great music scene. And at the same time, I'm going to think about what it must have been like to be jumping in the water off that Clotilda boat
Mm.
after riding across the halfway around the world in chains in the bottom of a boat, and then you know going to shore in this swampy place in Alabama. And then actually after the Civil War and the end of slavery, as many of those folks as could get there came back and started a community. And there's something about that that just
Yeah.
it's a beautiful human resilience. And there's still folks are still there that are direct descendants of those people. And so there's a your imagination goes to this iron strength of spirit that just I admire so much. So I want to tell the story. Same with
Yeah.
John Lewis,
Yeah, and this is a River of Roses. That's
Yeah.
your civil rights ode. Yeah, John Lewis, I've met on several occasions. I reviewed
Wow.
his autobiography for the CNN.com site, so
Wow.
got to know him
Awesome.
over the years. Yeah, great representative of the then Fifth District, which included
Right.
Atlanta. It's
Wow.
gerrymandering is huge all over the place, so that's
Oh
changed quite
yeah.
a bit. But
Yeah. You should see our district
yeah.
is like a snake.
Like, what's going on here? It's just like I'm in somebody else's district now. I am in, I think, Hank Johnson's district. It's like it keeps changing. But John
Yeah.
Lewis was, yeah, legend, totally, and a great song, River of Roses, good inspiration.
Yeah. So, I'm just kind of carrying on. I mean, I think, and also I think this is interesting too. When I about a week or two before I recorded the tracks for this album, the 9 of the 11 tracks, 2 of the songs I recorded at home here, but not the bulk of the songs were recorded in a couple of days. It's Blackbird Studios in Nashville, which is a really nice studio. And they have a program for audio students to learn how to be studio engineers. And they'll offer around to singer-songwriters or bands in Nashville and say, "Hey, do you guys want to come in and record these days?" And well, it only costs this much. It's an extreme bargain. And they have a wonderful professional engineer that's teaching, and so they'll instruct the students how to set up the microphones around the drums, et cetera. And you'll do a session or two, and then you do a couple of days of overdubs, playing guitar, playing keyboards, singing, playing percussion, whatever, harmonies. And so I did that, but when the manager of the studio called me with dates, I couldn't do any of the dates. I was on the road or busy or already booked for all of them. And then afterwards, he called me up and said, "Hey, if you can come in next week, it'll be free." And it wasn't a money issue for me, but he just said it'll be free. And I thought, wow, well, I should try to do that if I can. And it turned out I could do it. So I called my friends, a drummer, Brian Owings, and a bass player, Chris Donahue, and they were available. So I hired them to come in. And then I thought, well, what am I going to record? Because I wasn't planning on making an album next week. And of course, I'm a songwriter, so I could just record whatever songs I had. But instead, I made a list, and it was 9 of those songs. And I'm trying to think which ones I recorded there. I think I recorded Isolation and For the Life of Me at home. So all the rest of the songs were done here, I mean, at Blackbird. And I just wrote down a list, and it took me about
Nice.
5 minutes.
Huh.
And I thought that was interesting too, to be in a place in life where somebody can call you and say, "Hey, you want to make an album tomorrow?" And you're like, "Sure," and then you're like, "What can I record?" And you just write a list in 5 minutes, and it turns out to be what feels like a very coherent group of songs that go together. And in retrospect, and so and then I had two others that I recorded at home. So yeah, it was an interesting place to be in life. Like I write all the time, so there's always songs that I'm wishing I could figure out what to do with. And it isn't so much like I'm in Nashville and I can just pop over to Music Row and play a bunch of songs for people, and every young country artists are cutting my songs. That's not the case. I mean, I'm not that kind of writer. I may be again someday. That fashion of that world changes and morphs, but it's very, very youth oriented, and it's all about that sort of like, it's almost like uh more like the songs remind me of like R&B songs from the 90s. They're either just like super love songs, girl, I'm gonna,
Right.
girl, I'm gonna take you out, gonna lay you down, or just how fine you are, or also how awesome I am. Like, I'm so awesome, I'm a cowboy, or I'm a country boy. It's like I just I don't write songs like that very well.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
it ain't how I was raised. I wasn't raised to brag on myself. And but anyway, it's
Yeah.
interesting. It's interesting to see like and then you write a song like Bubbles Up where literally people respond, and yet there isn't a radio format to really play it. Like they worked it to adult contemporary, but it's probably a little too folky and country for that.
Yeah.
They played it some, but it's like a world of custom tailoring for each market. And if you're not exactly like that custom tailoring requires, and that's why the Americana radio is so great. And I know people are like, "Oh, what is Americana? What does that mean?"
Yeah.
It's just country that couldn't make it in the mainstream. And it's like, well, not really.
Yeah.
It's also people like Emmylou and Dolly Parton who are in the Hall of Fame and who have like 20 Grammys and who play arenas and theaters. And it's also just music that doesn't have that, laser focused niche of like what the marketplace requires. So it's really an artist's format. Like it's also a radio format that someone like me has access to. And that's what I always tell people who are like, "What even is Americana?" It's like, well, I'll tell you exactly what it is. It's a radio format that I have access to.
Yeah. That's what
I don't have
matters.
access to AAA radio because I don't have $250,000 to work a single. Country radio, same thing. Pop radio, I'm 60 years old. Who cares about me? Americana radio cares about me. So that's the radio format.
Yeah,
But
it's
it's also
tougher
the
these
radio
days.
for,
Yeah. It's
well, but
tough.
I mean
It
that
really
to me,
is.
but I don't know that I think that's tough. I think it's great.
Yeah.
I think it's that I have a radio format that I can access
Yeah.
and that they
Yeah.
will play my songs. And it's
Yeah.
up to me. And like, for instance, if we're talking about my career, I have an unusual career because I have all these things that I love to do. And I have
Hmm.
had people say, "Why don't you just focus?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm focusing on singing a harmony with Emmylou Harris and playing a solo with her because she's one of the greatest singers that ever
Yeah.
lived, and I get to play with her." Okay.
Yeah.
Privilege number one, Emmylou.
Right.
Privilege number two, Jimmy Buffett called me to write songs and play on his albums.
Yeah.
Well, who wouldn't
This-
want to do that? Paul McCartney played on the album, and so
Yeah.
did I. Hey, and then I wrote a song with Jimmy. Paul didn't get to write a song with Jimmy, but Paul liked it. Privilege number two. Privilege
Yeah.
number three, producing Shamika, one of the best voices that in contemporary blues ever been around, with the legacy of her dad, Johnny Copeland, and the legacy of other people that have produced her include Dr. John, Oliver
Mm.
Wood, blah, blah, blah. So, um,
Yeah.
and,
Oh,
and, and then I get to be a solo artist and I also get to be a band member in my own bands, whatever I want to do. And then I have an audience who's open-minded to hear, like, "I wrote a new song today. Y'all want to hear it?" They're like, "Yeah, I want to hear it," rather than like, "Oh, well, I'm going to go get a beer." And so there is a privilege, and there are even some little things that you have that are actually where you have it a little bit better than, say, Paul McCartney or Jimmy Buffett, in that I'm an artist who the audience is intimate enough to where they want to hear a new song. So lucky me.
yeah.
The
Yeah. Those
glass is
legacy
half
ones.
full. And then I get to do songwriting with soldiers. Like I have people that are healthcare
Yeah.
professionals. I mean, and they're really good at what they do. They're amazing. And they trust to bring me in to be the person that listens without judgment and writes down what people say and then makes it into a song, who isn't gonna run screaming like, I'm afraid of doing this, I can't handle it. It's more like, okay, I'll do it, you know. And so all those things happen all the time. There isn't just a season for one and a season for the next. It's like they're all rolled into one all the time. So there is a point at which I will probably have to let something go, and I don't want that to happen. Um, but I'm just in this place right now. I was talking to Mar. You know who Marshall Chapman is?
Yeah, yeah.
So she's a great writer and written a couple of good books too. And she told me she's in her mid 70s now, and she's kind of semi-retired, living off the coast of South Carolina, Pawleys Island.
Oh,
Good for
that's
her.
nice. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
beautiful.
And but she told me, she said, when I
Yeah.
turned 60, she said, oh, your 60s are going to be great. She goes, when I was 62, I was in a TV show. I was a character on a TV show. I was a character in a movie. I published a book and I put out a record.
Yeah.
And she was like, so she said, when I got to that age, I still had the energy to do all the work, but I also was able to handle the juggling from hour to hour or day to day. You know, okay, today I've got to talk to my publisher about my book. Tomorrow I've got a session to make my album. The next day I've got to shoot for the TV show. And the following week I've got to shoot for my movie. And on the weekend I got to clean my gutters. You know, she was like, I
Mm.
could do it. She's like, I'm 70 whatever now. I don't know whether maybe I could do it, but I don't want to do it anymore. But when I was 62, I could handle it. So that's pretty fun, uh, inspirational advice from somebody who's a little older than me, telling me that like you should be looking forward to being in your 60s because you're
Yeah.
going to be as capable as you've ever been in your life of doing the multitasking that is required of pretty much anybody, but particularly a working artist who's actually going to make a living off of it, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's something I'm looking forward to, and I'm in it right now.
Yeah. Keeping in good shape and mentally, physically, all that stuff, and you can keep going. And who
Yeah.
says that you have to age out? What's that all about? So
Well,
yeah.
I'm out there with Emmy Lou, and we're doing 2.5 hour shows, and she's
Yeah.
77.
Ah.
Willie's out there, Dylan's out there, of course, and of
Yeah.
course there's all these. I love my real listening passion is is jazz music from like the 50s through the probably through the 60s and early 70s, but and anything too, modern contemporary stuff and really old stuff. But I really love that era of recording: Blue Note Records, Verve Records, Riverside Records, Prestige Records, etc. And there's so many of those musicians too who are for Charles Lloyd. He's my mother's age. He's 86. He just
Yeah.
made a new album that's incredible. And just when you think he's playing like a nice slow mellow thing,
Yeah.
then it kicks up a notch and it's like these 10-minute songs, improvisations. And he's
Nice.
doing all he's taking it everywhere he can take it, from beautiful to raucous to atonal to back to beautiful. And he's out there on the road, playing. So that's inspiring too. It's like, just, I love to play because I'm a musician as well as a writer. I play on recording sessions and play multiple instruments. And so that's a part of my fuel for my fire for creativity too, is going and playing for someone else. I love that collaboration. Like sometimes I feel like I'm reading an article about myself when I have a new album out and there's a piece written somewhere and they'll be like,
Sure.
Will Kimbrough is known as a collaborator. And it's almost like you go, is that a negative? You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like that I haven't just concentrated on trying to be a rock star. It's like, the fact is even if you don't want to be yourself, you're still yourself.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
at some point you recognize yourself in the mirror and you go, oh, you're not very interested in being a star. you love to go perform, and you love to see that the room is full of people rather than empty. But at the same time, it's like you're not going to leave there and go just shopping for clothes or learning dance moves. Not that there's anything wrong with dance moves. Dancing is art form in itself, but I'm a singer songwriter and a musician, so I'm interested in those things. So um, it's important to know yourself, and so when somebody asks me to produce a record, I'll say, "Hey, I'm a singer songwriter. I'm a musician. I'm not going to envision what your art should be. I might be able to help you get the sound that you want if I feel like it's something that I can do or something that I even like or
Yeah.
hopefully love. But if you're looking for somebody to steer you in a direction like a Svengali or whatever, it's like it ain't me. I'm still trying to steer my own ship, and I will just do what I tend to do, whatever that is. But it could be a lot of different things in my mind. So, but so I just like to let people know that it's like play me your songs and I'll tell you what I think. I'm not looking to mold you into the next superstar. I want your record to sound great and to move someone's emotions or make them think about something. And it took me a while to figure that out. I was trying like, how can I sell myself as a producer? It's like, well, I can't because I'm
Yeah.
not that kind of person. I
Yeah.
know people who are good at it.
Yeah. You're in a good place. Good place. Good new release.
Thank you.
I really, really enjoyed it. It's out there. It's all over the place. YouTube. You could actually, can you get this on vinyl as well?
Hmm.
New
Yeah.
album. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's got a great many songs on there. And just go out there and get it for the life of me. Will
Yeah.
Kimbrough. Thank you for stopping by. I really,
Thank
really
you so
enjoyed.
much. I really enjoyed it too.
Take care. Hope to
Hope
see
I
you
see you
maybe
at Eddie's.
Eddie's Attic, late July of 2024 as we speak.
Come on.
Good
All right. Well,
deal.
let's do it again sometime. Hope I
Take
see you.
care.
You
Hope to
too.
see you. Have a good one.
You
Bye-bye.
too. Bye.
And I hope you enjoyed that talk. I know he gets pretty deep. He's a smart guy, incredibly creative, and a pleasure to speak with. I really enjoyed it. So until next time, take care.